So yesterday we were learning about we mentioned about marriage on Chol HaMoed, on the intermediate days of the holiday, or Erev Yom Tov, and making the meal on Yom Tov. We did talk about how there's a problem of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, that you don't mix one celebration with another. And we mentioned there are a few reasons that are given. Really, that's only one thought, and that idea of not mixing one simcha with another simcha seems to be the wording that our Gemara uses, v'samachta b'chagecha, that you celebrate your chag in your holiday and not in your wife, meaning that if you're celebrating your new wife, your new marriage, so that would be a contradiction to celebrating the holiday. But we did mention that there was big reason to celebrate, to make a celebration of the marriage by a holiday, because it would benefit the people by utilizing the fact that people are making a meal for the holiday anyway, so you might be able to save a lot of money that people didn't even have, and save money by making the celebration on the holiday. So it's interesting. There's a lot of discussion. For example, Shulchan Aruch talks about, can you make a wedding on Purim? So in chapter 696 in the Shulchan Aruch, it says you're allowed to marry a woman on Purim, and obviously the idea behind that would be, having the at least the understanding would be that you'd be able to get away with the meal. You're anyway having a Sudas Purim. You're anyway having a meal for Purim, so you might be able to use that meal as the meal for the wedding. That would be at least the simple understanding of this, and you'd save, you'd be able to save money. The Shulchan Aruch in this chapter 696 mentions this Mutter Lisa Isha B'Purim, and that would apply whether on the 14th day of Adar or the 15th day of Adar. And the Mishnah Berurah brings down that it's not a problem of the Samachta B'Chagecha. That, in other words, why would you be allowed to get married on Purim if you're not allowed to get married on a Chol HaMoed of a regular holiday? Why could you get married on Purim? So the Mishnah Berurah over here brings down that it's not the same, because by a holiday it's called a chag, but Purim doesn't have the law. It's not called a chag, at least sure biblically. It's not called a chag, and therefore it would be permissible to get married. Now, the Magen Avraham is not so comfortable with this. He says you could make the chuppah on the 13th, meaning on the fast day, and the meal you would have at night. And but the other opinions, the Shari Tshuva, they say you could have it. You do it like the Shulchan Aruch says, and you could actually do the whole wedding on Purim. He brings another opinion that maybe you should. It's Chemed Moshe, he brings that it's even more proper to do the chuppah at the end of the day, and people should have their Sudas Purim earlier, which sounds like they're going to do a Sudas Purim besides the actual wedding meal. You're going to have a meal of Purim, then you would have the wedding, and then you'd have the wedding meal. So now the Be'er Hativ over here, which summarizes the different opinions, he says that if you look back regarding the laws of Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of the holiday, making a wedding on those days, he says, we hold that your Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, here also it should be prohibited to do this. and therefore you should make the chuppah on the 13th day, on the day of the 13th. So that's the Magen Avram's view that we saw in the Mishnah Berurah, that he says you should make the wedding on the 13th, because the Magen Avram is not comfortable with this law that the Shulchan Aruch, that the code of law says. The commentary, the Magen Avram is not comfortable with it. So the Shulchan Aruch says you could get married on Purim, but the Magen Avram says no, get married the day before, Erev Purim. You could have the meal on Purim. You get married at the night of the fast day of Tainus Esther, Erev Purim, the day before Purim, and then you would have the meal afterwards. Now, if you look back in the laws of Chol HaMoed, which is in chapter 546, so over there it mentions this law that we were speaking about getting married on a Yom Tov, and it says that you could get married on an Erev Haregel and make the meal during the regel. In other words, you could get married Erev Yom Tov. Now, it also mentions you cannot get married on the Chol HaMoed. You wouldn't be allowed to get married on Chol HaMoed, but you would be allowed to get engaged and do the first part of the wedding. And as I mentioned yesterday, the reason for that is because we're nervous. Shema Yekadmenu Acher, maybe someone else is going to grab your spouse, and you won't be able to marry them. You won't be able to marry her.
Rabbi?
So therefore, you would be allowed to do the erusin, but mutal ares. But of course, you can't make a meal of erusin. It says as long as you don't make the meal, but you just you do the actual erusin, and that's basically what it mentions here in Shulchan Aruch. Mishnah Berurah brings down that it's you're allowed to get married on an Erev Haregel, on the day before the holiday. So in other words, you get married right before, and then you would celebrate that night. Then you would have the meal that night. Now, so the Mishnah Berurah brings that that it would be advisable that the Achrayim write it's the person should be careful, preferably to make the wedding in the morning, so you have a full day before the holiday starts to celebrate with your spouse, and this way also that you could have a meal. The first meal with her would be before the holiday. But in a time of need, the El Yerabba permits it, even if it's late and it's getting close to dark. And the Magen Avram writes that the minhag in our communities is not to do it. And the Magen Avram has complicated some issues with this whole idea of getting married on an Erev Yom Tov. But the Mishnah Berurah concludes that in a case of need, you could rely on the Shulchan Aruch that allows it. Now, I remember in Israel, one of the Rabbanim there was telling me that they don't allow getting married on Erev Shabbos. There's people in Israel who consider getting married on an Erev Shabbos. This way they could have the meal Friday night with their Shabbos meal. So in other words, it would be like a what you would call a Malava Malka type of thing. You'd have a Shalom Zachar type of thing. You'd have everyone come. It'd be the Shabbos meal. You do the official ceremony before Shabbos, and then on Shabbos you have the dancing, you have the celebration. And the Rav was telling me that you can't, that they won't allow that. They made an official rule that they don't allow it in their community because it's just too complicated, and having everything run organized on time and before Shabbos, and it sounds like a nice idea, nice way of saving money, but it's not so practical for practical reasons.
The problem is also that you might want to invite family that doesn't live close by.
Well, that's up to you. That you can decide if you.
Yeah, but I'm saying when you celebrate a wedding, you really want to have the family around. So that's the problem with the Friday night weddings too,
Right, but that's up to the family if they want to go, spend thousands of dollars because their relatives might not want to come for Shabbos. I don't know, or they could find them a place for Shabbos maybe. But that's not for the Rabbanim to tell you that you can't do it because your relatives won't show up. That's a personal that's your own personal interest. But we're talking more from the halachic perspective. So the Magen Avram here. He does deal with this issue of getting married on Erev Yom Tov, and it says that it brings Chuvas Rashba that you can't have the first meal, the meal of the wedding on the holiday, even if you got married on Erev Haregel, and he says it implies that way from the Rambam. He says it's surprising that he brings this that you could be lenient because it's a rabbinic thing. He asks a question that it seems that it might be a biblical prohibition of having the meal on Yom Tov, and so he wants to prohibit it, even though the Shulchan Aruch permits it. He's got a long piece over here where he seems to not want to allow such a thing. Okay, yes, Moshe.
Rabbi, my concern about having the simcha, the wedding, on the same day that the Megillah is being read is the fact that Haman is being mentioned over and over again. Even though we're condemning it, it's still being mentioned during the time of a wedding taking place. I mean, it's not really. That doesn't seem like it's really something that seems like it would work out too well. I mean, if somebody's in another room, if there's a Megillah being read in one room, and then there's the wedding's being celebrated in another room, and they can be heard. You know what I'm saying?
We lost him again.
I guess we'll have to get used to it.
Oh, he's back.
Okay, I'm back. Hear me now? Am I
Yeah,
still muted?
we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry, I don't know. They must be working on the.
You're gone again.
On the wires. Okay, Moshe, you were saying that the problem with a wedding, Moshe?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I'm listening.
Oh yeah, but that seems a little bit concerning to me because I mean, if there's a Megillah reading taking place in one room and then there's a simcha taking place in another room, and Haman is being said over and over again in the Megillah reading, I mean, you would think that would they wouldn't be inappropriate,
Yeah, so probably the people who are celebrating the wedding also have to hear the Megillah, right? So they would be listening as well. So they'd have to stop the wedding.
There's several Megillah readings. I mean, it doesn't have to all be, just one. I mean,
Right.
I'm just saying, if it's,
Yeah. I don't see why it's a problem. They'll have to pick a shul that only has one or something. Okay, or they'll do the wedding at a hall, not at a shul. Okay. Yes. Who else? Yisrael, you wanted to say something.
I had a question before before a rego that let's say that a marriage is completed before Yontif. Is it mutter to have large groups over the course of the first week for Sheva Brachas, or should that be toned down?
So the interesting thing is they discussed that, like, how do you, like, if you're the Shulchan Aruch permits getting married on Erev Haregel, what about the Sheva Brachas? That's a good question, because that's they all ask that question. What about the Sheva Brachas? How do you do the Sheva Brachas? You're going to be celebrating the wedding more. It's going to override a little the holiday. But so they all ask this question, and the answer they give is Ein Ikar Hasimcha Ela Tchilas Hanesuin, which means the main joy of a wedding is the beginning. And even though you're going to be Mesameach for 7 days, it's permissible. So that's the question that they all ask you. So it's a good question, but that's how they answer it. That it's not a problem. Yes. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so that's the story with this getting married on a holiday. And now let's get back to our Gemara. Okay, so we were on page 8b, and we learned that we did this brisa on page 8a. That's where we started. That on page 8a we said that v'samachta b'chagecha, that you should rejoice on your festival. That includes all kinds of rejoicing. And the Gemara explained in this brisa that you could be yotze, you could fulfill with any way, however you need to, however you can fulfill this rejoicing with the sacrifices that were pledged, sacrifices that let me mute everyone here. Sacrifices that were pledged, sacrifices that were part of your meiser behemah, your tithing of the animals. You could fulfill it. A kohen could fulfill it if he eats the sin offering or the guilt offering of a regular Israelite. The kohen could fulfill it with a bachar, a firstborn animal, the chazav shaik, the breast and the thigh, which is from the shlamim offerings. And it could have been you could have thought that maybe you could fulfill it with a bird offering or a mincha offering, and the verse says no. V'samachta b'chagecha, that it has to be a sacrifice that the korban chagiga could be brought from, and those sacrifices that a chagiga could be brought from, that's how you fulfill the mitzvah of shalmei simcha. So again, we're talking about there are two peace offerings that we're dealing with. the main thing that we're dealing with is the peace offering of joy. How do you fulfill it? And it says you could fulfill it with all options. Any way you could fulfill it. If you ate some other sacrifice, you fulfilled your obligation. How do we know that it can't be with birds or with meal offering? Because it says b'chagecha, which says compare this peace offering with a peace offering called chagiga. Now the chagiga peace offering can only come from an animal, and therefore it can't come from a bird or a meal offering. Therefore, the peace offering of the simcha of joy that you have to have on every day of the holiday, that also would have to be from actual animal, not a bird or a meal offering. And the Gemara then gave another reason. Rav Ashi said that we learn it from V'samachta, that you see from V'samachta that it has to be joy. There's no such thing as joy from a bird or a meal. That's not real joy. The real joy comes from a good steak, a good piece of meat. So the Brisa brought a proof it has to be similar to Chagiga, and Rav Ashi brought a proof from that it's V'samachta, that it's not joy. These are not called joy. You get a good meal offering, a good artisan bread. That's not joy. Joy is a piece of steak. Has to be a carbon with steak with meat, and that would be joy. Now, one of the later commentaries wants to say that based on this argument, nowadays, would you fulfill your obligation with enjoying eating, let's say, chicken at your Yom Tov meal? We have a mitzvah to have on every day of Yom Tov Simcha, and we can't bring a sacrifice. So would there be an alternative option of doing what to you is joyous? So the Rambam writes that you're supposed to make children happy, you're supposed to make your wife happy, you're supposed to be happy. Now that this happiness that the Rambam writes about, it's not in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. It's even now. It's nowadays. And the Rambam writes that you can't. You could fulfill the mitzvah with other options. So the Rambam seems to be following the idea that since we can't bring a sacrifice now, so the mitzvah of simcha would be fulfilled with anything that brings you joy. So if you have joy from chicken, shawarma, you could fulfill it with shawarma. You could fulfill it with schnitzel. You could fulfill it with fish. Whatever brings you joy, with chocolate. Now, according to Rav Ashi, however, that it's nothing to do with the sacrifice. The whole concept of joy, it's not a fulfillment of joy unless you actually have meat. So according to Rav Ashi, you would actually need to have real meat to fulfill this obligation. There is no way of fulfilling it. It doesn't really change because we don't have a sacrifice. The fact is, simcha would only be from real meat. So there could be could be a way of learning it based on this argument here as to nowadays, if you would fulfill it with with alternative options. Now, the Gemara then said that what does Rav Ashi do with the word b'chagecha, that you should rejoice on your chag? According to the other opinion, the opinion in the Brisa, we know why it says b'chagecha, because it's comparing it to the Chagiga sacrifice, that just like a Chagiga, only items that a Chagiga could be brought from, you would fulfill your obligation. So the same thing as Simcha needs those same type of sacrifices, and you could not fulfill it with birds or with meal. But what about Rav Ashi doesn't use the word Chagecha? So what does he use the word? So what would he learn from that extra word? So the Gemara says that it teaches us, Ein noisim nashim b'mayed, you don't marry women on a holiday. And I guess, as Isaac mentioned yesterday, that it mainly means on Chol HaMoed. because it's not really dealing with Yom Tov itself. It's really dealing with Chol Hamoed. So, and how do you know that you can't marry a woman on those days of the holiday? Because it says v'samachta b'chagecha v'loy be'ishtecha, you rejoice on your chag, and not on account of your new wife. So that's the teaching of the Gemara, that there would be a problem of getting married. Now again, we're talking about noisin nashim, about the second part of marriage. The first part of marriage would we saw was not an issue as long as you don't make a meal. But the second part of marriage would be a problem, ein noisin nashim b'mayed, because your rejoicing should be in the holiday, the festival, and not b'ishtecha, not on account of one's wife. Now, the Gemara doesn't really go back to the opinion of the Brisa. What does the Brisa hold? Are you allowed to marry women on a holiday, on Chol Hamoed? Would you be allowed to? And so the commentaries mention that there are other ways of learning that you can't marry a woman on a holiday, and that's not the only source. The source is, this is not the only source. There are other sources for not getting married on a holiday. And one of them is tircha. It's too much pain and bother. A wedding takes a lot of stress.
He froze. Ay, 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 ay.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm gonna move my computer to a different room. Sorry about this. Twice in one day is or three times too much. Okay, then the Mishnah that we learned yesterday, we learned this new Mishnah about if a person has many oichlim, many people who he has to feed, many mouths that have to eat. He's got to feed a lot of mouths. And what does he do if he doesn't have a lot of money? And he's got to bring these sacrifices. So which ones should he put his prioritize on and spend more on, and which one not? So we mentioned that, I should say the Mishnah mentioned that he should, such a person should bring many shlamim, peace offerings, because peace offerings are edible. But oila offering, the burnt offering, is burnt totally for Hashem. So if the person doesn't have enough money and he has a lot of people to feed, he should concentrate more on the Chagiga offerings, which is the peace offering, rather than the oilas or oila offerings. He'll bring his obligatory oila, but he doesn't have to bring abundance of them. And now, what happens if a person has a lot of money and he doesn't have many people to feed? So he could bring a lot of oilas, and they'll all be burnt and used. They'll all be for Hashem. Now, shlamim, he would bring less. And the reason for that is he doesn't want to have any meat left over. And and there is a prohibition of noiser, it's called. You're not allowed to leave anything. You're not allowed to leave from the meats. And over the period of shlomim is a 2-day sacrifice. A shlomim is 2 days and 1 night, so you can't leave it over. So therefore, you wouldn't bring so many shlomim. You would bring oilis. Yes, Ben. Ben, I don't hear you. You're muted. Ben. Ben?
Somebody else is allowed to disappear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we hear you. We hear you. Ben, you.
Can't see you either.
Ben, we hear you. Well, guess not. We just lost him.
No,
Rebbe,
we just, he's not there.
Rebbe, when you said things like before, you said you don't do it because of tircha. The question is tircha of what? The party that you're bringing, or the first night with your wife? Tircha.
You know what? It's a Gemara there in Moed Katan. I have to look it up to know what it says over there on Daf. I think it's Ches, Daf Ches. Let me see. I might sure probably Rashi mentions it. It's let's see if we could pull it up here.
Can you hear me now?
So the Gemara there says Ein Marvin Simcha B'Simcha. A person is going to be involved in his and then the Gemara says because of the exertion of the wedding preparations, and which is prohibited during the festival. So let's see if so it's tircha on the mayid. So I think that answers the question. Isaac. Yeah.
Rabbi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, I lost the picture, but you can hear me now.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, why can't they solve it the way they solved it in Egypt the night they left?
Solve what?
The issue with the meat. Those that had too much meat had to share with their neighbors because they had to finish the meat that night.
So a chagiga was not a shareable sacrifice.
Right.
In other words, each person was obligated. Simcha was fine, but the chagiga, you had an obligation. Each person had their own obligation.
There too, everybody had their own obligation. But those that had too much meat shared it with a neighbor to make sure that they're going to finish it.
Yeah, but there they did not
need leftover.
Right. But there they didn't need to have separate sacrifices for each person. Chagiga is an obligation on each individual.
Yeah, no, there was just a family issue, I think.
There was a family.
Yeah.
Here, there's an obligation on each individual. Oh, maybe you're.
In other words, don't have it left over. Give it to somebody that can use it that night.
No, I hear you. The initial answer, my initial thought is that each person had an obligation for the chagigas. I'm not 100% sure
if you can share
how that worked. Of course, they could share it because it doesn't say that you could only be the one to eat from it. But the mitzvah of chagiga was on each individual. Now, does that fit with our Gemara? That's a good question, because our Gemara mentioned that you would buy a large our Gemara mentioned that you would buy. We'll have to look. We'll have to research that a little. All right, that's a question for tomorrow. We'll try to touch upon it tomorrow. So the Mishnah continued and said that oilos, that a person had a lot of money, he should bring oilos and not shlamim. Less shlamim, more oilos. Oilos. What was the term? Oilos, maybe oilos merubais ushlamim muatim. He would bring a lot of oilos and smaller amount of shlamim. And on this, then it says that what about if a person has very little of everything? In other words, he has little money, and he also has very few people to eat. So such a person is what the Mishnah said should have the minimum of at least a ma'a kesef and shtei kesef. That you have the two sacrifices, or you have the difference of opinion between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as to how much the Chagiga should be, either one kesef or two kesefs. Now, and the same thing with Oilas Re'iyah would be the same story. It would be either one kesef or two kesefs for the Karban Oila. So when you have very little people to feed and very little money, so you would have those two minimums of one kesef and two kesef. And as I mentioned, depends on the opinion of Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai, which one is which. Is it the Oila, the burnt offering, the one kesef, and the Shlamim Chagiga two kesef, or the opposite? Now, what happens if a person has an abundance of both? Zev v'zeh merubin, if you have both, a lot of money and a lot of people to feed. On this person, it says, Ish kamatnas yodai, according to the gift of his hand, according to what he gives, kiberkas Hashem alakecha shenasan lach, like the blessing that Hashem gives you. So in other words, you could do abundance of both. And the Gemara asked that if you have a lot of people to feed, but you don't have a lot of money, so the Mishnah said, so bring a lot of shlamim, bring a lot of peace offerings, because you'll feed a lot of people with them. The Gemara asked, but that does not seem to, how does that work? You don't have a lot of money. It sounds very nice to tell the person, okay, so you have shlamim, you'll feed a lot of people with them. Yeah, but you don't have money for them. Yeah, you don't have a lot of money. So how are you going to pay for all these shlamim? Where are you getting the money from? You're limited with funds, we just said. So you're giving me an advice. Buy shlamim. But shlamim are not cheap. Shlamim also cost money. So the Gemara answers that you could do toifel umevi pargadol. That you could be toifel and you could purchase a big par, an ox, with a bull with toifel. And toifel, was that idea of supplementing the money with money that's anyway consecrated. So you anyway have to separate that other money that's called Meiser Sheni money. So it's not costing you so much out of pocket because you're using consecrated funds for it. You're combining the funds, and therefore that would be a way that this would be permissible. This would be a way to do it. Now, yesterday, I think Robert had asked if you could, what is it? Why does it specifically say a large bull? And really, the Karban Shalmei Chagiga could be a sheep, a goat, or a cattle, male or female. And so this Shalmei Chagiga does have different options. But I guess if you need a big one, I guess out of the sheep, goat, or cattle, the cattle, which I guess refers to the bull, that would be the the best option because that would be the biggest. But really, it could have said a big sheep or a big. But I guess a bull is probably bigger. I don't know much about farming, but I'm just guessing that that's the I don't know. Maybe Ben could tell us a little about that. But the bull has to be up to 3 years old, from the 8th day until the 3rd. From a bull would be from the 1st birthday until the 3rd birthday would be a bull, or the cattle would be from the 8th day till the 3rd birthday. Now a lamb would be until the 1st birthday.
That could be about 800 pounds.
800 pounds. Okay,
That's a lot of meat. That's why.
Now a goat is until the 2nd birthday. So I guess that itself explains it, because the limit of the age, the bull is actually till the 3rd birthday. So that gives you makes it older, would make it bigger as well, besides being a bigger animal. Okay, so the Gemara then says that so you're going to be able to use this teuflin. Now the problem that the Gemara has is that Rav Sheshes doesn't like what Rav Chizda says. Rav Chizda says teufel umevi par gadol. He says you bring a par gadol, and Rav Sheshes says something, and we're not exactly sure what his what the issue is. He says, Hare Amru, behold, they said, Teuflin behema lebehema, that you supplement an animal with other animals. Now, what does that mean? Is he saying Rav Chizda's wrong? Is he saying what Rav Chizda option, or Rav Chizda didn't give enough options? There's more options available? Or, you know, what is Rav Sheshes really adding? He doesn't say it so clearly. He just says, behold, they said this other thing. So does that mean that what Rav Chizda, what is he arguing and saying what Rav Chizda said isn't correct? Or is he saying that you didn't give all the options? So the Gemara tries to figure it out. I think I'm going to read you. Let me read this Gemara inside again. So we're going to start from the Gemara, the word shlamim merubin. We'll start from the Gimel Mem, the big letters Gimel Mem. It's 15 lines from the top of the page, maybe 13 lines. We're on page 8b, and the big letters in the Gemara are Gimel Mem, which stands for Gemara. This is the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah ends and the Gemara begins. And the first word in the Gemara is shlamim. Shlamim merubin. If you have many, if you have many people to feed, you should bring shlamim merubin. You should bring many peace offerings for the Chagiga. So the Gemara asks, Mehecha Maisi, where are you going to bring these if you don't have a lot of money? If you're limited with money, we're talking about someone who has few possessions, which means little money. So where is he getting this? How is he affording this? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Chizda, the Gemara says, Halesla, he doesn't have. So Amar Rav Chizda, Teufel, or maybe Pargod, that he uses this concept of Teufel, which means supplementing, and he brings a large bull, and that would be a way to provide enough for everyone. What does he mean? Because by supplementing with funds that are not your pocket money, you're able he's able to afford it. If he had to use all of his cash, he couldn't afford it. But he's basically using a small amount of cash, which is either that 1 kesef or 2 kesef, depending on Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and that's what he's using from his pocket. And the rest of the money, he's using consecrated funds. He's using money that anyway is going to be used for a purpose of food, like Meiser Sheni, which has to be eaten in Jerusalem anyway. So it's really set aside money, but he can use that as a supplement to his initial 1 kesef or 2 kesef and make it and buy himself a very large par, which would provide for all of his dependents. Now, the Gemara says, Amar le Rav Sheshes, Hare Amru Teiflin Behema LeBehema. But the rabbi said that you supplement an animal you supplement the animal with other animals, which would mean that you can add, you buy one animal that's solely unconsecrated funds, and the other animals you buy with consecrated funds, Meiser Sheni money, second tithing money, which means that something that Rav Chizda said doesn't really fit. Or Rav Chizda had said this idea about buying one pak, and Rav Sheshes is saying one bull, and Rav Sheshes is saying you're supposed to have it separate. One would be totally unconsecrated, and the others would be consecrated. You'd supplement one animal with other animals. And so Gemara says, Maika Amarle, what is Rav Sheshes telling Rav Chizda? If he's saying this, if he's saying that you can't do what Rav Chizda said, that what Rav Chizda said is wrong, if he was saying that, he should have said it in different, he should have verbalized it differently. He should say, you can't do what you just said. You're not allowed to combine the money into one animal. You can't do that. So so he didn't use those words. He said it a little differently. So Ella Hachi Amarle, this is what he said. Hare Amru ein Teiflin Behema LeBehema. Hare Amru af Teiflin Behema LeBehema. What Rav Sheshes must be saying is that the rabbis say there's an alternative option, and you only gave one option. You gave the option of combining money and buying one big animal. Why not do the other option as well? Tell people the other option, that you could you could buy one animal that's totally unconsecrated, and you could add other animals that are totally consecrated animals. They have that alternative option as well. Why didn't you mention that? So the Gemara says, now that statement that Rav Sheshes just said, if we want to translate it this way, we want to explain it this way, this doesn't really flow with the two opinions that we know of. The two opinions we know of were mutually exclusive. They did not agree with each other on anything. They specifically said you have to do it my way or the highway. And Rav Sheshes wants to say you have both options. So the question is, who is Rav Sheshes? Where's Rav Sheshes getting his opinion from? Kiman, who is this according to? Why is Rav Sheshes arguing Rav Chizda and saying you have both options? The two opinions that we know of that talk about this both said you only have one option, and it's either this way or no way. And the other one said it's either that way or no way. And so why is Rav Sheshes saying you have both options? And the two options are either combining money to buy one big animal that has both unconsecrated and consecrated funds, or buying more than one animal, and one animal would be solely unconsecrated funds, and the other animals could be solely consecrated funds if need be. So the Gemara says, "Kaman, who does this go like? The like Chizkiah, the like Rabbi Yochanan. This will not fit with either with either Chizkiah or Rabbi Yochanan. Neither of them seem to follow this idea that you can have both options." So the Gemara says, maybe you'll say, yeah, the Amoraim do argue, and they don't, and they disagree that you can have both options. But Masnisia, like Pliga, but maybe the Brisas do not disagree, and maybe they would say that you could have both options. So maybe you'll think of it that way, that maybe that although the Amoraim, you're right, Chizkiah, Rabbi Yochanan won't follow this way of thinking, but maybe the Brisas will. But even that doesn't work, the Gemara says, because the Brisa says that the first consumption, the first eating, has to be from unconsecrated source. And if you're telling me that you want to buy one big animal, that animal would be a combination of unconsecrated and consecrated. And the Brisa implies that it has to be the first eating, which would mean the first animal would be solely unconsecrated. So it doesn't seem like the Brisa will agree with this. So my answer is no, you translated it wrong. We can translate the Brisa differently. So the way to translate the Brisa is shir demei achila rishonim and achumen, that it means the value of the first consumption should be from unconsecrated money, which means that the obligatory part of it has to be from unconsecrated funds, and after that you could have consecrated funds in the same animal, and it would be acceptable. And so the Brisa is basically giving both options to for you to use, of course, because the Brisa's wording allows both interpretations to be used. So what comes out is that we have three opinions here. One opinion is you can only combine money. The other opinion is you can add animals to the animals, and one of them would be totally unconsecrated. The others could be totally consecrated. And the other opinion is you could do both. And that's basically the difference between these three views, Chizkiya, Rabbi Yochanan, and the way Rav Sheshes is interpreting the Brisa. So that's the conclusion of this little piece of Gemara. And the Gemara continues now with another discussion, and that is if a person could bring many sacrifices for his Karban Chagiga. And if he can he bring them on different days? So the initial understanding is that a person should bring them all on the first day of the holiday. But the question is, what happens if a person didn't? Would he be allowed to bring them on subsequent days of the holiday? And as Rashi says, the question is, would this be considered Baal Tosif? Would you be considered to be adding to what the Torah says because you already fulfilled your Chagiga obligation by bringing these sacrifices on an additional day? So you brought it already once, you fulfilled it. Now you're doing you're adding to the Torah law. You're bringing a new mitzvah, doing a new chagiga. So maybe that wouldn't be acceptable. Again, on the first day you can bring as many as you want, but now because you're fulfilling your one big obligation, you're expanding it, true, but it's allowed. But once you fulfilled it, the question would be, would you be allowed to do it on the next day? So here, this is a new piece of Gemara, Amar Ula. And if you want to know where we are on the first word on the line, Ula, which is about, I would say 18 lines from the bottom of the page. 18 lines from the bottom of the page. Let me just count. Maybe 16 lines from the bottom of the page. So Amar Ula says Amar Reish Lakish, that Reish Lakish says, Ula says in the name of Reish Lakish, that Reish Lakish says, Hifresh Eser Behemais L'Chagigas, if a person brought 10, he separated 10 animals. He argues, I should say. He says, "Kivan shapasak shuv einay makru." Once he stops bringing on the first day, he can't go back and offer more. Again, this would be the problem of Baal Tosif adding a new mitzvah to the Torah laws. So it seems like we have an argument. Now, Rababa says, "V'loi pligi." There isn't an argument. Here you could differentiate and say that they're talking about two separate cases, and V'loi pligi kan bestam kan b'mefarish. Here, where Rabbi Yochanan says that you can't go and bring on the second day anymore, is in a case where you did not clarify that you're bringing these animals on the first day. But if you were mafarish, kanba mafarish, Reish Lakish's case, where you clarified, you expressed your mafarish, you clearly specified that you want to bring all these on the first day. So for whatever reason you weren't able to, you didn't, you would bring it on the next day. So this is the understanding that they're not arguing. And if you were mafarish, if you explained yourself that you plan on bringing all these on the same day, on the first day, then you would be allowed to go and bring it on the next day, because it would be now called a tashlumen. It's called a makeup. You're not adding a new mitzvah. You're just making up what you were supposed to do on the first day. But if you just said, these are all going to be sacrifices called chagigas, and you didn't say that they're all for the first day, so what ends up happening is you brought your obligation on the first day, and now you're sort of like doing a new mitzvah, which is not a mitzvah. And you're doing Bal Tosef, you're doing this addition, you're adding to something that's not necessary. So the Gemara says, "Hi stam hechidami." What is the case where you didn't specifically designate these animals? Ilema, in other words, you didn't specifically designate the animals, and then you're bringing them on two separate days. What's the reason for it? So the Gemara says, "Ilema deleka shos b'yom likarev." If you're going to say because you don't have time to bring it, so you brought as many as you could, and now you're stuck. This that you didn't bring it as a sacrifice today is because there wasn't enough time in the day. So that's not you're not trying to add a new mitzvah. You were stuck. So now you're going to do a makeup on the next day. That should be allowed because you intended to do them all on the first day. The problem is the time didn't allow it. Okay, but you planned on bringing them on the first day, so the fact that you want to bring them on the second day should not be called Bal Tosef because you're just doing a makeup. Maybe the reason is because you don't have people to eat it on the first day, and therefore you're pushing it off to the second day. So the thing is, you're going to bring 5 and then say, "Oh wow, it looks like there's a lot of meat in these. Okay, I guess I should wait. I should hold off with the other 5." Now, if you're going to hold off with the other 5, the reason you're holding off is simply because you're stuck. You have so much meat, you didn't realize how much meat. You thought the animal would be much more fattier and much of most of it would be inedible. It turns out that it's a very it's a full of meat and whatever. You don't have enough people. Some people backed out maybe, and they're not eating with you. And so ultimately, the point is that you found out now that you don't have enough people to eat it, so you're pushing it off. So this that you're not offering it as a sacrifice, akrivinu, for bringing it as a sacrifice, is because you don't have people. So you really want to bring it, you just can't. So this would also be a case where you're stuck. You should be allowed to bring it the next day because as a makeup for the first day, because you're not trying to do something new, you're trying to just bring these sacrifices were meant, you intended to bring them on the first day. The Gemara answers like tzricha, so it must be that the case is that the Ika shows by Yom that there is time to bring these offerings. And you have people to eat it, and you still didn't do it. And since you didn't offer it on the first day, it shows clearly that you're simply leaving it over on purpose for the next day, and therefore that would be a problem of Bal Tosef. We're going to stop here, and we'll continue with this Gemara tomorrow, Mr. Hashem.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.